What's going on, everyone? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres with ScoopDuck on 3, coming to you on a Tuesday, October 15th, 2024. Glad to have you along, and thank you so much for being here for another episode of the pod. Joining me on today's episode is ScoopDuck owner and publisher Justin Hopkins as we continue to break down some final thoughts on Oregon's monumental win over Ohio State. We'll talk a little bit about Purdue, and make sure you stay till the end for some Oregon recruiting talk because it was a massive weekend in Eugene. With that being said, J-Hop, how are you?
I'm great. I've got probably 80% of my voice back, maybe 75, somewhere in there. So that's good. I mean, it's Tuesday, so it's been a steady climb to get my voice back. But no, good. Just been really, I don't know about you, but I've been really enjoying the last couple of days, seeing all the like all of our content, but then all the videos and the outpouring and the just people talking about the game and talking about the atmosphere and the win and Dan Lanning and all those things. It's been a fun few days.
It's been a really, really fun few days. I just got back to Long Beach last night, so spent a little bit of extra time in Eugene. I got to walk around my old neighborhood where I lived when I was at the U of O and living in Eugene. So that was just super fun. Plenty of Dutch Bros was consumed this weekend. And honestly, it maybe sounds cliche. I feel like I say it a lot, but it truly felt like a movie out there in Eugene this weekend, just getting to cover the Ducks and soak up all those Pacific Northwest vibes.
Yeah, if you're watching one of those Hallmark movies or whatever, and they're drawing up some big dramatic movie. I mean, that literally was the script. I mean, just the weather, the kickoff time, all and I think it's easy to forget about this, but you have to really think. The atmosphere was great. The turnout was great. Ohio State fans traveled well. I've seen a ton of positive interactions between the two fan bases. Of course, there's always going to be outlier assholes here and there, but for the most part, I've seen Ohio State fans very complimentary of Oregon fans and vice versa. So I love seeing that in the sport because at the end of the day, we're all human beings, whoever we root for. But I mean, to have ESPN game day there, and Pat McAfee and the Bussin' with the Boys and all the some of the big national Josh Pate, to have them there and take in that experience is something that I don't know people are valuing enough, because when those people who aren't in this bubble like you and I and the others that are week in and week out with Oregon athletics experience that and see that and then go out and tell the world, it's kind of like a whoa, this thing really exploded, and it definitely did.
And I also look at it in a way with with all the buzz around the Ducks this whole offseason, everything you were saying, everything I was saying, the rest of the Oregon media market, and then the national market as well. Everybody was saying it, but it felt like Saturday was just the ultimate endorsement, the ultimate example that Dan Lanning is building something in Eugene, and it's for real. It really is. And it's funny because I feel like if Ohio State won that game over Oregon, people be like, oh, yeah, it's Ohio State. Sounds about right. But because Oregon won that over Ohio State, it was in Eugene, first major Big Ten opponent for the Ducks. It just felt like kind of this perfect storm. I mean, the post-game environment was unbelievable. I was down there on the field level, and then I kind of got trapped inside the swarm of students. It was Autzen Stadium like I've never seen it before, and who knows what this really means. I think that's a column I'm going to have to take for the recruiting side, but just what this means for Oregon, just where they're at, landing signature win, whatever you want to call it. It feels like it's impossible to overstate the impact of a win like this.
Well, here's the thing I think about leading up to the week. Obviously Oregon had played UCLA, hadn't really got, Michigan State, hadn't really gotten to like, and those don't, like, not to be rude, but those don't really validate much, right? And the question was, how would Oregon and Washington and USC and UCLA integrate into the Big Ten? And the Big Ten's a physical conference. They've got big bodies on the line of scrimmage. That was talked about at length, once these schools basically joined the Big Ten and we got into fall camp. And I had people last week asking me, how do you think Oregon, will handle, how are they set up for the Big Ten? And my answer, I was confident every time. I was very clear. I said, Oregon's built on the line of scrimmage. I don't know if you guys have not paid attention to Oregon's recruiting efforts or them ever playing. Oregon's not small on the defensive line. Oregon's not small on the offensive line. They've got bodies. They've got dudes. They play with power. And I'm not saying that they manhandled Ohio State. That's not what I'm saying. Although Oregon, I did think, was a bit more physical at the line of scrimmage. It's clear they were built to compete with the very best in the Big Ten. So now you look at Penn State or you look at Michigan or whoever else is kind of validated and up there, and you say, okay, well, we know Oregon can compete with them at the line of scrimmage from a physicality standpoint. Now it's going to be some of these other things, skill players. And we saw Dan Lanning basically steal possessions, and that's the name of the game. You steal possessions with that onside kick that was genius. You basically, the 12th man thing that we've talked about or everyone's talked about. Those are ways that you kind of steal possessions and kind of, I don't want to say cut corners, but that's the name of the game. If you're not cheating, you ain't trying. And that's not cheating, but that was certainly skirting the gray lines a little bit.
It's a game of inches, right? And you got to take advantage of every possible, little loophole that you can. And that's exactly what the Ducks did. I think that the penalty for me in real time, I definitely didn't realize what was going on, but obviously after the fact, everyone's been talking about it. So it was interesting that Lanning didn't outright confirm it, but he didn't say that he didn't do it. I know that's been another talking point around it, just about how people are saying, oh yeah, Lanning confirmed it. Absolutely, genius move. So I don't know if that's necessarily what I take away from hearing his little snippet at the press conference, but either way, he prepared for it. The Ducks prepared for it, and they were ready to do whatever it took when the moment presented itself, when the opportunity was there. And just to talk a bit more about Lanning, Justin, I think that he really proved, not even just on that call, but just his aggression, his aggressiveness throughout the game. He was talking about how they played to win. He trusted the defense. Really, I think at the end of the game, when he kicked that field goal and they said, hey, I think they're going to get the ball back here, that's kind of what you're setting yourself up for. Ohio State got the ball back, and I'll admit I was a little nervous there down in the field, a little 2-minute drill action from Ohio State, but he was able to kind of put his team out there on the line, show that he trusted his guys, and really prove, I think, not that there was doubt, but more so than I think any game he's coached, he proved that he is an absolute asset as a head coach and really a decision maker.
Yeah, I mean, he was aggressive at times, but I thought he was better about when he picked being aggressive. There was some potential fourth down opportunities that I think in games past or even the last year or two, I think we would have seen Dan Lanning go for it, and he didn't. They were around midfield, and that was me watching the rewatch, just watching some of it. I'm kind of glad Dan didn't go for it there. I think we're seeing him continue to grow and mature as a young head coach. So yeah, I mean, he's the talk of the town now. He already was, and a lot of people have him high on the head coaching boards to begin with, but that certainly really validates, because it was, kind of based on, okay, he's a young coach, he's going to grow, he's doing a pretty good job, but, recruits like an animal, but now you go and put this win with it. It's like, okay, you're almost looking at the complete package here. I think most people are saying, and, that puts him with the elites of, Kirby Smart and Nick Saban and those guys. And he does not have the resume that those guys do, but I think you see the trajectory that he's on going that way. And that's what you're looking for if you're an Oregon fan.
One other aspect of the game that I kind of wanted to make sure we hit on, Justin, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about Purdue after that. You mentioned it yourself. This is an Oregon team that's built on the line of scrimmage. And one of my takeaways after the game was just how much that defensive line stepped up in Jordan Birch's absence. But we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the offensive line, because if you told me that Oregon's offensive line would play like they did against Ohio State after what we saw the first couple of weeks, I'm not saying I'd call you crazy or anything like that, but I don't think anybody at that point would expect Oregon to put out that kind of a performance that they did on the ground. Dillon Gabriel wasn't sacked all night long. The Ducks didn't have a phenomenal rushing performance, but they had a strong enough and decent performance, 155 yards on the ground, averaged 5 yards a carry. So you got to give a tremendous tip of the cap to Alik Terry and what those guys were able to do up front, because they were a huge factor in that game. And I think that this is a building block for them moving forward that gives you a bunch of confidence in what they're going to be able to do the rest of the way.
Well, yeah, what was Oregon's biggest question headed into this game? And it was the offensive line. That's the biggest question on the team. And, now we have to kind of start to really quiet down on those questions, because it's been a few weeks since they've given up a sack, and you went against one of the best defensive lines in the country. Although, keep in mind, they practice against one of the best defensive lines week in and week out at Oregon, but they went up against a different one at Ohio State. And I wouldn't just say they held their own. They did a great job. Jordan James found some really good running lanes, had some good seams. He played awesome. I think if Dylan Gabriel wanted to hold on to the football a little bit more, he could have ran the ball and thrown probably 50 more yards on there easily if he wanted to. So, yeah, I mean, it's great to see the offensive line rise to the occasion. And it was great to see that defensive line of Oregon's rise to the occasion, minus Jordan Birch. I said this before the game. I knew and expected Birch wasn't going to play, and I felt like, everybody wanted to compare it to the Kayvon Thibodeau situation. It wasn't the same, right? It wasn't the same. They're both good players. Kayvon Thibodeau didn't have the kind of depth that Oregon has on the defensive line behind him then that they do now. So I felt good that, and we saw Mateo stepped up. Caldwell had a good game. Derek Harmon and Amari Washington were absolute animals. And if you go back and look at the game and chart, Ohio State does not run the ball up the middle against Oregon. They had two good runs, back-to-back runs, and rarely had any other than that. And they have two of the best running backs in the country. So you could see that they knew Oregon's interior of the defensive line was a problem, and they were avoiding it.
No doubt. No doubt. Tremendous game from that defensive front. And Derek Harmon, just with every game, Justin, it seems like he really has kind of solidified himself as the biggest transfer portal addition on that defense. Jabbar Muhammad and the rest of that secondary, I think, did a really good job against the Ohio State receivers. But Harmon's ability to just impact the game and force turnovers and generate pressure just continues to be such a difference maker for this Oregon defense week after week. Now the Ducks are gonna hit the road this week. Any final thoughts on Ohio State, or are you ready to turn the page a bit to Purdue?
No, I hate to turn the page on a game like that, but unfortunately, when we're on a Tuesday and the game's in 3 days, you kind of have to do that. So yeah, I mean, you still want to ride that wave, right? And we're seeing the recruiting momentum and stuff continue to pay off. But yeah, I mean, we're just a couple days away from Oregon traveling to West Lafayette to play Purdue, and they're known as, I guess you would say, giant killers. So this becomes a very important game all of a sudden.
It's a huge game for the Ducks, who draw a weird schedule these past 3 weeks, right? Justin, you have Michigan State on a Friday night, then you got Ohio State primetime, and now you got another late kickoff on Friday night in West Lafayette as the Ducks head out to face Purdue on a Friday night kickoff. That game will be on Fox. But like you said, giant killers or trap game, sneaky team, whatever you want to say about Purdue, I think this is certainly a matchup that the Ducks have to take very seriously. They're coming off of a brutal 50-49 loss in overtime against Illinois last week, a game that they slotted in redshirt freshman quarterback Ryan Brown, and he had a heck of a performance. So that's certainly a guy that the Ducks are going to be preparing for very heavily and watching his tape from the last week. So I think I don't know. I guess you could call it a trap game if you're looking at this one. The only another note I'll just throw in here real quick. One of my buddies, Matt, he went to Purdue. And he was there in 2016 when they knocked off Ohio State at home. So certainly not a game that the Ducks are going to take lightly, and they got to show up.
Yeah, I mean, Purdue's earned that reputation because they've had some big wins in the past. And now, you look at them, they're a different team. They were not very good under Hudson Card. They're better under Ryan Brown. Now, that was one game, right? So you throw them in the middle of a game due to injury. And, Illinois had no idea what to expect. He's a redshirt freshman. There's no film of him. You have no idea other than his high school film, and you don't expect to see him in a game. So there's a little bit of that there, right? So now Oregon's got film on Ryan Brown. You're not going to see his full tendencies, but at least you're going to have an idea. Okay, here's what he did do well. Here's what he didn't do well. Illinois got pressure on them. They contained whatever they did to have success or to get beat with. Oregon will take that. And so they at least have some game film that Illinois didn't have the benefit of. Oregon's also a better team than Illinois. But, I mean, if you just look at this letter of the law, this is a trap game, classic trap game. And, there's no realm where this should be a close game. But those things matter. I mean, you got big game hangover. You just, I said this in one of my articles. It felt like every player on Oregon and Ohio State gave an extra 5% in that game on Saturday trying to win because it was a heavyweight knockout game. So how tired are those guys? How heavy are their legs? They gave their all, right? And this is where your depth is tested, which we know Oregon's got really good depth. This is where, to me, the biggest thing for Oregon, this is where your culture is tested. This is where the guys on the team are together and saying, guys, don't screw this up. Don't lose track. Don't just pretend we just played Ohio State. We're invincible. We have to go play Purdue. So execution becomes paramount, taking care of the football. All the things that you do in the big games for Ohio State got to transfer over. And this becomes a real test for us Oregon fans and for national people to see what Oregon's culture is made of, because they should be able to win this game going away. That's why they're a 28-point favorite. But still, your culture is going to be tested here.
And after a huge win like that, the big game hangover aspect that you said, the best teams can navigate that. The best coaches can navigate that and make sure that their guys show up each and every week. I think Dan Lanning's done a really good job of that throughout most of his Oregon career. I think about the Pac-12 title game against Washington. There was a tremendous amount of anticipation in that one last year, and I really thought the Ducks were going to show up. And what happened? They came out flat. But to their credit, they fought and clawed their way back into that one, and they had that one within striking distance. But for Purdue, this team is 1-5 on paper, Justin. But I think that we all know how much a new quarterback running the offense can just completely change things. So I think that that's really the wild card element when you're looking at this game from a big picture view.
Yeah, it's how much film can Oregon study and kind of, because the offense came alive under him. And so now, hey, is that because he's that elite of a player? Is it because, Illinois was kind of caught off guard? I think it's probably a little bit of both, right? But yeah, and here's the thing. This is an unknown territory, right? They went and played on the road at UCLA. You kind of know UCLA, right? You went and played on the road at Oregon State. You know what it's like to play in Corvallis. You don't really know what it's like to play in West Lafayette. Even Dan Lanning said, I've never been to this venue. Now, granted, these are well-paid players and coaches now, and they should, be able to handle that and navigate it just fine. But I will say this, okay? I know Oregon's a 28-point favorite. I don't really give a shit about that. Win by 1, win by 100, doesn't matter. Just get out of Indiana with a win on Friday and keep moving forward.
There you go. Ducks head to Purdue to face the Boilermakers on Friday night. Any final thoughts there, Justin, or are we kind of moving right along?
Yeah, no, there's tons of recruiting to get to. I think you and I can talk a little more in the next day or two on Purdue if we need to. But yeah, I'm excited for this game. I'm excited that it's a Friday game because there's some killer Saturday games on slate this weekend.
We love Friday games because it allows us to watch all the big games on Saturday. Before we get any further in today's show, I want to give a quick shout out and thank you to our sponsor here, Ranchito Grill in Springfield. I'm not sure what your dinner plans are, but head on over to Ranchito Grill at 1537 Mohawk Boulevard. Try the homemade tortillas. They got great food, a great environment, and they will take care of you. Say what's up to my guy, Ruben, and let him know that Max Torres sent you. Justin, you kind of alluded to it there. We have tons of recruiting stuff to get into after what happened this weekend out in Eugene. The Ducks scored a huge win over the Buckeyes and multiple commitments on the recruiting trail. So you guys got to see us at ScoopDuck.com. If you're not already subscribed, I've been getting a bunch of interviews with both of those new commitments and with some of the big time visitors. So if you're not already, go see us at ScoopDuck.com. We got some amazing recruiting coverage, and Justin and I have already logged a couple of predictions coming out of that weekend. So starting off, I think the big news of the weekend, Justin, we already talked about Tamohini Tapui, the modern-day defensive lineman committing. Well, the Ducks got another one. They did. They flipped 2026 Salt Lake City Bingham defensive lineman Viliami Moala away from the USC Trojans. He was also on campus this weekend for a big visit to Oregon. And before you know it, it looks like Tony Tuiotti's defensive line haul is coming together quite nicely. You love getting a commitment anytime, but I think any Duck fan would tell you it hits a little bit sweeter when you flip one from the Trojans.
Yeah, and so this is a tale of two recruiting cycles, right? We've talked about this already. There is, and was, and continues not to be much defensive line talent, in the 2025 class, right? We talked about, just there's not many bodies. And Oregon's not going to be in the business of, oh, let's just take a guy because he lives in California and he got a couple offers. They're not going to do that. So, but conversely, we look at the 2026 class, and it's really good. Like it's really good. I mean, there's not normally 3 or 4 guys out west, I would say west of Utah, that Oregon would take on the defensive line. And well, lo and behold, they've already got 3. So that makes things really, really, I'll say this again, makes things really difficult for the USCs and UCLAs and Washingtons that really have to depend on the West Coast for a lot of their talent. Dan Lanning took it. And if they go get Bot Molitalo out of Utah, who's kind of the last lingering defensive lineman in that Western footprint, that's currently on the radar, that's a clean sweep of 4 for 4. So will they be done? Probably not. We'll see them go after some of the national guys still. But I mean, I just look at that class, and I already said it before, these 2 commitments. But when you're building and you have a number 1 ranked class like Oregon does in 2026, and more than half of your commitments are on the line of scrimmage, that's a really good problem. Between quarterback and line of scrimmage, I think that's like 6 of the 8 commits right there. So great spot for Oregon. Love the pickup and the flip of Moala. Kind of felt like that was something that was, more of a win, not if. And yeah, I mean, this 2026 class is absolutely rolling.
Ducks add another one to the number 1 recruiting class in the country, according to On3. And Justin, I was able to catch up with Moala a little bit after his commitment to kind of get the scoop, get the lowdown. And one of the things that he said was a really big factor here was Coach Tuioti. Tony Tuioti, I think he's been an incredible recruiter, an incredible coach since he's joined Dan Lanning's staff and been in Eugene. Obviously, the play of his son, Tatum Tuioti, is another major positive for the Ducks and this defense that Dan Lanning has helped run with Tosh Lapoy. So that was a big factor in Moala's decision. And he said that he kind of recruited him a little bit differently than other coaches did. He said that he kept him accountable on things like his grades was one that he mentioned. Of course, you can read the full write-up over on ScoopDuck, but it was just interesting. He talked about how the trip was amazing. He keyed in on Mateo Uyunglele, who was playing a phenomenal game. And he thinks that big things are coming for this Oregon class. He said, quote, "We're going to be the best in the world. Just wait for the 2026s to come up, and we're going to shock the whole world." So another huge addition for Dan Lanning and the Ducks here. Going to throw on a little bit of tape here if you guys are watching us on the ScoopDuck On3 YouTube channel. If you're not, you got to come see us because it makes it even better, the coverage that we bring to you guys, and subscribe to the channel as well. But Justin, this is a guy on tape that is just an absolute hoss, just a really physical guy. He plays both ways, offensive and defensive lineman, but just absolutely crushes the quarterback on that play. I'm going to run that one back one more time. Violent hands.
I think he's dead. Holy cow.
You don't want this guy running into you at all, Justin. So this is someone that I think projects to obviously play the interior of the defensive line at the next level, someone who is easily north of 300 pounds. I think he said he was in the 6'3", 6'4" range when I interviewed him. So just another huge body in this class. You add that to Tamohini Tapoi, who I've covered a long time out at Mater Dei, just a tremendous talent. And then you also have Tony Cumberland, a top 25 prospect that recently transferred out to Eugene, now at Willamette High School. And boy, this I think already has the makings of one of the best defensive line hauls in the country, Justin. A distinction, mind you, that I think Oregon probably took home in the 2024 recruiting class with All-Americans Aiden Breland, Jericho Johnson. You also have Tion Gray, Jackson Jones, Elijah Rushing in there. So Dan Lanning and the Ducks are continuing to make defensive line a major priority, and they're off to a hell of a start in 2026.
Yeah, and it's it's never ideal to like miss on a class at a position group or skip a class or whatever. You want to just kind of keep that pipeline going. But I will say this, with what Oregon signed on the defensive line at 24, 25 is not a great year on the defensive line. We've already gone over that. Don't need to do it again. But then if you look ahead at 26, obviously they've got the 3 now, probably lead for Bot Mulatalo as well. So you're looking at 4 potential commitments here, and we're not even to November yet. Of course, you got to hang on to them, but still, if you can pull those 2 classes with enough numbers together, that little lull in the middle, if you will, depending on how they finish 25, doesn't kill you. So, I mean, we know Oregon will always prioritize the line of scrimmage. We know Dan Lanning will always prioritize the defensive line. And, I mean, you got to love that they've been able to load those guys up early. And, I mean, yeah, the recruiting class for 26, it's got the makings of being the best ever already.
And I've written a lot about it over on ScoopDuck, Justin, but Utah is continuing to be a major state that Duck fans need to watch on the recruiting trail. Dan Lanning loves him some Utah, and they've gotten some great players out of there. Jackson Powers Johnson, Jeffrey Bossa, of course, the shining examples of that state that are currently on this Oregon roster. But Moala is obviously a big name. And then, like you mentioned, Bot Mulatalo out of Lone Peak in American Fork, Utah is certainly another that's worth watching. And I think Oregon's in a great spot there. Heck, I might have to take a little recruiting trip out to Utah, Justin. I've been trying to figure out what my schedule is going to look like. And maybe Utah, I think definitely Utah is worth a trip for me to bring some of this recruiting coverage over at ScoopDuck. So another phenomenal addition for the Ducks. I mean, he's only rated a 3-star, I believe, for us over at On3, but I think that there's plenty of time for him to increase that rating. Don't forget the Ducks also have Dutch Horace from St. John Bosco at edge committed in this class. So this is a class that is coming together quite nicely if you're Dan Lanning and the Ducks. Another guy we got to talk about, Justin, you talked about 2025. Oregon's kind of had some challenges, some ups and downs in the 2025 class at defensive line, some guys that they've missed on. But there's another big name that was in town this weekend, and that, of course, is none other than newly minted 2025 recruit, New Orleans, Louisiana, Edna Carr defensive lineman, 5-star defensive lineman Jaem Stewart. He was one of, if not the very most important 2025 visitor on campus this weekend, along with Caleb Burns, the Baylor linebacker commit. Justin, this is a guy who doesn't seem like he's super close to a decision. I think he's going to take it all the way to the early signing period in early December. But, man, I think you get the God, you just look at that video where he just picks up the running back like he's a toothpick or something. You look at him and his recruitment. Ducks are going against USC, Ohio State, LSU right now in this one. But after interviewing him and also speaking with his trainer, Clyde Alexander, that is certainly someone that I think Oregon has a really good shot with. He raved about the visit throughout the interview with him, talked about Dan Lanning and Tosh Lupoi, Tony Tuioti, just how much time Dan Lanning spent with him, really putting that personal touch on it. And I think Oregon's got a great shot here. I'd even venture to say that the Ducks lead coming out of this visit for Jaem Stewart, which might sound kind of crazy, but if you look at what they did in that game and just the opportunity to capitalize that they had, I don't think it's that much of a stretch. The question is going to become, Justin, can they hang on to that lead? And what's going to happen now over these next 2 months or so?
Yeah, that big visit glow is dangerous, right? It's great when you catch it. It can be troublesome to kind of hang on to it. So, yeah, being his first official visit, that can be a good and a bad thing. Although I totally respect Oregon for bringing him for this game, because if you're shooting your shot, that was the one to shoot it on. So, yeah. And secondly, like I've just talked about, if you're not going to sign many defensive line prospects in the 2025 class, you can kind of salvage that with signing potentially maybe one or maybe two really good players, and then of course building around them in the class before and the class after. So I agree. Coming into this weekend, I didn't think Oregon was any better than third or fourth in his recruitment. Was probably trailing LSU and USC at the very least. And for me, in my eyes, I see this as an Oregon LSU battle at the moment. I think that will continue to be the case. I think USC has just continued to fade out of this recruitment, and we know that they've had troubles, recruiting and hanging on to defensive linemen. For Oregon, this is one you got a shot with, right? You'd love to have a shot at maybe like an Elijah Griffin or a Justice Terry, but those guys are back east and not looking at anybody out west. So if it's not an option, it's not an option. At least with Jaem Stewart, he seems to be, interested in coming and playing out west. Oregon did everything there. I don't know if they lead, but I would say I think that the very least right now, coming out of this visit right now, they're probably right there with LSU. And I think everybody's now chasing Oregon and LSU for Stewart. So I think but I'll say this, I think you're going to have to get him back on campus at some point. It could be an unofficial visit. That's fine. I think you got to get him back on campus before he makes his decision.
That would certainly help Oregon's chances if you're able to get him back after that official visit. And I think after hearing how well the visit went, I don't know that they're going to have a super hard time convincing him to come back to campus. It's just going to become a question of logistics, I think, Justin, and timing, because at the end of the day, this is a recruit that is coming from New Orleans all the way out to Eugene. Again, the Ducks having to overcome some distance here in this one, but they have done absolutely everything they can as far as when they got him on campus and they had that opportunity with him in person. And again, I think that just the Dan Lanning factor is going to be absolutely huge in this recruitment, because Stewart told me that he told Lanning he wasn't looking for that extra attention, but he still got it. I'm looking for the quote here. He said, "I told him I wasn't looking for the attention, but it was a little bit better to my recruitment because it shows how much he wants me here. He knows if I commit, it's going to be a lot into that defense." And then again, to reference that Clyde Alexander conversation that I had, he said that it was, quote, absurd the amount of time that Dan Lanning spent with Stewart. And he kind of said, if I was Lanning, I wouldn't have even spent that much time with Stewart. So the Ducks have made their absolute best pitch. Their chips are all on the table there, I think, for Stewart. It's just going to be a matter of kind of managing and navigating the other trips that he's going to take coming out of this weekend.
Yeah, and, of course, NIL will be a factor. I don't get the impression that Stewart is a money grab player. I mean, he's going to be paid his fair due by somebody. It's got to be competitive. I mean, Oregon's not going to, give him 10 grand and LSU is going to give him 100 grand. He's going to go to Oregon. That's not the case. I think if you're competitive as far as the and those were just numbers. Those were just numbers, for example. But if you're looking at Stewart, you got to be competitive there. But I think these other things are going to be as big of an impact in his recruitment. Again, he just doesn't strike me as a money grab guy. And so I think Oregon has decided probably that's the case and will pour those extra, recruiting resources into him, knowing that that's probably the case.
Well, again, if you guys want to read the full interview with Jaem Stewart, you can do so over at ScoopDuck.com. Absolutely massive weekend, and we've got all the coverage you need covering the Ducks on the recruiting trail over there. One more guy, maybe, Justin, we can talk about.
We got tons of them. We should probably get through a couple.
Okay, sure. I'll let you take it. Who do you want to talk about next?
I mean, to me, the next important guy that was on campus is 5-star corner Jaem Stewart. I think, you got to look at him, taking that visit. Again, we've talked about it. We know the storyline. Jaem Stewart is committed to Ohio State currently, but he just showed up in Eugene to watch Oregon beat Ohio State. So that's a storyline in it and of itself. I've said for a while now, I think it's going to be really tough for Ohio State to hang on to him. Oregon and Auburn have been there, have been the two that have been most talked about outside of Ohio State. And I think right now, if you're just out of the three, I would say, Oregon's got the best shot to flip him of those two. And now it becomes, can Ohio State hang on to him? It seems like that might be a really tough task for the Buckeyes. And this kind of, we'll bang out two in a row here because there's so many. This right here is impacted by the Brandon Finney recruitment, right? Obviously visited Oregon, another cornerback, great player. Oregon loves him, doesn't want to get rid of him, would love to keep him, but it certainly feels like distance is becoming a concern of a bit, and Penn State's lurking. So if this becomes one where you lose Finney and you add Alford, I mean, Oregon, by and large, is still in great shape there. You don't want to lose Finney. I'm not suggesting Oregon's dropping him or we didn't want him anyways. That is not the case. But let's look at this in a glass bottle here. If you lose Finney and you gain Alford, you're still in pretty good shape at the end of the day.
Yeah, if you're kind of trading those two, I don't think that's the case necessarily. But if you lose one, add one, I think you're still in pretty good shape. And not to discount Finney by any means, because he has risen up the rankings and I think gained a ton of respect nationally as one of the best corners in the country. And that's why Oregon wants him and has recruited him. So getting him back on campus is good. You just wonder if it's enough to overcome the likes of Penn State and Michigan as they give chase and, of course, have distance on their side. As far as Alford goes, it is kind of puzzling to me that he hasn't been back to Ohio State since the summer, I believe. I wonder if that is maybe indicative of kind of where things are at here. Auburn on the field, not looking too hot. So I think that certainly gives Oregon an edge here if you're just looking at what they're doing on the field and kind of what they're going to be able to sell. But you couldn't have asked for a better opportunity to shoot your shot here with Jaem Stewart, and you got him to come out on an unofficial visit. Of course, he already took his official with the Ducks earlier in the summer. So I don't think that this is a guy that Oregon leads for, but you certainly feel a little bit more confident coming out of the visit in their chances to ultimately get that done. He spent a lot of time with Trey McNutt, Dorian Brew, two other DBs that are committed to the Ducks. I think that obviously helps their case. So we'll see. He hasn't done a lot of interviews. He's doing a really good job of keeping his cards close to the vest. But Oregon's going to shoot their shot, and they'd love to get him because he's another top guy from the Southeast, an area that they're trying to break into every year.
Well, and just to put a bow on this, what's been one of the most talked about storylines from the Oregon-Ohio State game, it's the fact that Evan Stewart absolutely cooked Denzel Burke, who was being hailed as an early rounder kind of a guy, and Stu cooked him. So did Tez Johnson. Burke plays corner. I'm just saying, Naeem Alford plays corner. Not the best showing for Ohio State on that front.
Sure. I mean, there's a bunch of details that kind of go into all of that. So we'll continue to track this one. I'm trying to kind of see if I can get a little bit of scoop, a little bit of intel coming out of that visit. So I'll make sure to share any of that I get with our subscribers over at ScoopDuck. Justin, one more guy maybe before we get out of here.
I would say one more segment with 3 names in it.
Let's go. More merrier. More the merrier.
And they all play the same position, ironically enough. So, I mean, it's pretty easy. 2 of them are linebackers, 2025 guys. There's a nice segue for you and I. Matson McKay obviously visited Oregon this weekend. I believe, do you have a prediction? No, I have a prediction in for McKay.
I think I'm going to throw one in soon. Yeah. This is Caleb Burns on the screen, by the way.
That's fine. We're coming to him next. So I have put in a prediction for Oregon to land him. So does Steve Wiltfong. That's who the other person is that has one in as well. And then you and I both have them in for Caleb Burns along with Steve Wiltfong. Those are both 2025 linebackers that have gotten basically predictions coming out of this game for the most part. Both were on campus. Matson's going to take a 2-year mission, so he's a little bit different there. But Burns is a stud. Like, this is the guy. I mean, you're just watching the film. We've watched it before. Absolute playmaker. I feel like Oregon leads for both those guys. And I'll throw the third one in so you know where I'm going and throw it to you. Talanoa Ely just got one from Tom Loy at 24/7 Sports. I am not quite ready to throw mine in. He's 2026 linebacker. I believe he's like the number 3 or number 4 linebacker in the country in his class. Elite dude out of California. I believe Oregon leads. I believe Oregon has led and has been the team to beat. But coming out of this weekend, there's at least one prediction on him. Those are all 3 linebackers, everybody. 3 really good ones too.
Absolutely. So yeah, the big development for me, I guess, was Caleb Burns over the weekend. I got an interview with him talking about his official visit to Oregon. Special dynamic there, Justin. His first trip to Oregon, also his official visit to Oregon. So the Ducks rolled out the red carpet there, and I don't think the visit could have gone any better. If this is an Oregon versus Oklahoma battle, which I believe it is, I don't think he's going to stick with Baylor. You gotta be confident in Oregon's chances here because of when he came, because of everything I've been hearing about the visit and everything I've reported on the visit, and then it's not all sunshine and rainbows in Norman either. I think that the Sooners are definitely heading in the wrong direction right now. That they barely beat Auburn a couple weeks ago, and Auburn is just not that good of a team this year. So I think that even though the Sooners have distance on their side here, Oregon's really done a tremendous job, I think, turning up the heat and applying the pressure on Caleb Burns. His family loved it as well. Both of his parents were there. So all signs seem to indicate to me that Burns is going to be ending up a Duck whenever that does happen. He's supposed to head out to Oklahoma this weekend for an unofficial visit when the Sooners take on South Carolina. Another thing that gives me some optimism here, that official visit still isn't set. So I just feel like that's probably something that would have been worked out by now if he was really as interested in Oklahoma as maybe some people portray it. So that's kind of what I got on Caleb Burns. I think I'm going to be putting in a McKay Matson Oregon pick before too long. I got another interview with him also on ScoopDuck. For me, it's like everything he's saying is tremendous. And then you look at the final 3 as well, right? BYU, Oregon, and UCLA. He is of LDS faith, so you give BYU a shot there, of course. But I think if Oregon really wants McKay Matson, which I think they do, they're not going to lose out to BYU. And then lastly, with Talanoa Ely, Orange Lutheran standout. I've seen him play a number of times, just a phenomenal talent, a guy that can do a lot of different things. Definitely a bigger linebacker than both Burns and Madsen, who we've discussed here. But I know that Brian Michalowski has really prioritized him, and then he's had great things to say. Ely has about the Ducks staff, and he's made the trips too. That's another thing you got to track. So Oregon linebacker recruiting certainly looks like it is trending way up. And the last thing I'll add here, I got to tweet it out, but I did hear from Noah McHale. He did not make it out to Oregon this weekend. So the Texas A&M linebacker commit is a guy that Oregon's going to continue to shoot their shot with, but didn't make it out this weekend. I know that there was some speculation around that.
Yeah, obviously, Madsen and Burns are 2025 linebackers. Talanoa Ely is a 26 linebacker. Just to recap that. So they're different classes. So, yeah, of course, Noah McHale remains on the board. No matter what happens, if all three of these guys committed, whatever, you're still going after Noah McHale. So I know that's a work in progress for Oregon. I think his Texas A&M commitment is still fairly solid at this moment. And they're starting to play better football too. So there's that as well. You just keep chipping away. And if you can get there, you can get there. I know that's a guy Oregon wants and Dan Lanning wants. So that's nothing more than Texas A&M doing a great job recruiting him there. But at least linebacker recruiting is on the come up. Just to put a quick bow on it, tight end recruiting, the other one people talked about, Vanderplug was on campus, UW commit. I think we both agree Oregon's in probably a really good spot there. And then, of course, there's just a ton of buzz around Oregon and Lincoln Cure, the 5-star Kansas State commit. I don't think a flip is imminent there, but I think a flip is certainly possible. So tight end recruiting could be looking on the up and up too.
It absolutely is. Well, it's been a jam-packed episode, Justin. Plenty of recruiting talk. I'm always here for all of that. But I know you got to roll, so we're gonna go ahead and wrap this one up. If you want to find more of Justin, you can follow him on Twitter /X at JHopkinsSD. Find me on any social media platform at mtorresports. Subscribe to the ScoopDuck on 3 YouTube channel, and while you're at it, come see us at ScoopDuck.com and subscribe to us for all the latest and greatest in Oregon football and recruiting, and then share the show. So that's the best way you can kind of support what I'm doing on the audio side, what Justin and I are doing with the pod. So until next time, thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish Podcast.